Welcome to the Thursday morning Pastor's Bible Study at Trinity Lutheran Church, Camp Hill. I'm Pastor Horner, and I will be leading us in a conversation of the book of Acts, beginning with chapter 15 and verse 36. And we're going to go all the way through the 18th chapter. Okay. After some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Come, let us return and visit the believers in every city where we proclaimed the word of the Lord and see how they're doing." Barnabas wanted to take with them John, called Mark, but Paul decided not to take with them the one that had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not accompanied them in the work. The disagreement became so sharp that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus, but Paul took Silas and set out, the believers commending him to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So Paul is revisiting the churches that he visited and that he established actually on his first missionary journey. So he's going because, he was there before. He began the churches. He formed those communities. And now he wants to check up on them, and he wants to reinforce all of the teachings that he had done before. And we see that there is this disagreement that occurs of whether or not to take with them John Mark. It's interesting because as we read this, Luke is writing this, and you can kind of see in the words that are used, he's taking great care with how he describes this disagreement, right? And it's interesting because we see that, people in the church disagreed. I think that's an important fact. And I'm always shocked when I come across people that aren't churchgoers, and one of the reasons they say that they're not churchgoers is because, people in the church, they get into fights all the time. Well, yeah. So that makes us, like people, right? That happens. People get into disagreements. But we can see in this, I think, a nice way in how this disagreement is kind of handled, right? I think that really makes a big difference. So Paul doesn't want to go with Mark. He doesn't want to go with Mark because Mark had, for whatever reason, left them when they were going into Pamphylia. And so he's just against it. So Barnabas decides, okay, fine, I will take him because I still think, Barnabas is probably thinking, still think he's somebody that we need to invest in as a young believer, right? And of course, we know that John Mark will be the writer of the Gospel of Mark, right? So he was somebody that they wanted to invest in, but probably because Paul had such an intense personality, and you can see that in the writing too, right? An incredibly intense personality. I mean, he is 110% full speed, get out of my way, here we go. And probably there was this clash of personalities between John Mark and between Paul, and it was better for them, you know what, I will respect what you do. And certainly we know that Paul respected Mark's gospel. He says that so in other letters, how important this gospel is in telling the story of Jesus. But he's not going to, but in this case, he doesn't want to travel with him. He knows it's going to cause a conflict, and they decided we'll split, we're going to just split up and go different ways. Barnabas and John Mark are not mentioned in the book of Acts again. They are off doing their own thing. But they also, don't really break fellowship, which I think is really important. That even though they had this disagreement over whatever, they're not going to break the fellowship because of that, right? They're still going to be in fellowship. It's just they've decided, we'll go this way. We'll start churches in this area, minister to the churches in this area. You go that way and do that. Moving on. John went also to Derbe and to Lystra, where there was a disciple named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was Greek. He was well spoken of by the believers in Lystra and Iconium. And Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and had him circumcised because of the Jews who were in those places. For they knew that his father was a Greek. As they went from town to town, they delivered to them for observance the decisions that had been reached by the elders, by the apostles and the elders who were in Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in the faith and increased in numbers daily. So Paul goes back to the place. So you'll recall in the when Pastor Liz was with you, he goes back to the place where he was stoned. So that gives you a little bit into the character of Paul, right? He is going back to the place where they literally stoned him and beat him up and threw him out. This is a person of great courage and tenacity. And so he is still going to care for those churches that he left behind. And he's going to go to those places. We also see that Paul must have learned his lesson that he had with Mark. Because he knows that, you know what, it's important for him to be able to nurture other young Christians in the faith and raise up that next generation. One of the things that I saw in churches again and again is the need to always bring up the next generation, always to be thinking about who's next. So you have a person in a position of authority or in a position of power, you always want to be thinking, who's my second? Who's next? Who's next? Because you realize that, you know what, in churches, guess what? Sometimes people move, right? Sometimes they die. Sometimes they get sick. Sometimes they lose faith. Sometimes they want a different challenge. So you always want to be working on who is the next up, who's the next person, right? Always transitioning that leadership, letting people kind of go through the processes and transitioning leadership. And Paul learns too that he's got a strong personality, and he's got to find somebody that can match up with that personality. But he does need to always be thinking about who can I mentor, who's the person that I can mentor, and he finds someone in Timothy. He learns from his prior experiences, and he has to adjust, right? He can't be that constantly hard-pressing person that just clearly alienated a person like John Mark, where their relationship didn't get. Now, under Jewish rabbinic law, because Timothy's mother was Jewish, Timothy is considered Jewish. But he does need, if he's going to be Jewish, he needs to fulfill the covenant, and for a male, that would be to get circumcised. And so Paul asked Timothy to be circumcised in order to remove some of the stigma that would have been there for some of the Jewish believers that they were going to be ministering to and sharing the gospel with. Now, you might look at that and say, well, wait a second, didn't Paul say other places that you didn't have to be circumcised? Isn't that the whole point of kind of the Pauline theology? And you would be correct. In Galatians, Paul makes it very clear that circumcision is not the entry into the family of God, it's baptism, right? But I think here you have to think of it from the standpoint of what is he trying to accomplish. See, it's not a question of that they're looking at circumcision incorrectly in this case. In this case, he wants Timothy to be able to appeal, if you will, to the Jewish believers that they are sharing the gospel with. And he knows that if he's not circumcised, that's going to be a stumbling block, no doubt about it. They're immediately going to put up the blinders, the walls, and they're not going to want to deal with Timothy. And so that's why he tells him that it would be better if he were to be circumcised. In the case of the Galatians, you had people who were saying the only way to be a believer is you have to be circumcised. And so Paul was reacting against that to saying, no, that is not what it takes to be a believer. What it takes to be a believer is to give your heart to Jesus, not to give your foreskin. I just made that up. That was pretty good. Yeah. So it's a different, but notice it's a different circumstance. It's a different situation. And why, in this case, he says, no, go ahead and be circumcised. And clearly, well, Timothy, we assume Timothy didn't, was okay with that and went through with becoming circumcised. There's a word that's used for how they dealt with those with the churches. So in verse 5, so the churches were strengthened in the faith and increased in numbers daily. The Greek word there is esterionton, which means to be made solid or firm. To be made solid or firm. The Gentile church is growing. It is thriving. They are making them solid. They're making them solid. In verse 6, they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak of the word in Asia. When they had come opposite Mysia, they attempted to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When we had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. We learn a lot in these short verses. What do you think you learn in these short verses? Who's in charge? The Spirit. The Holy Spirit. God. God is in charge. So the apostles are just not making these decisions and just going in their own ways. God is the one who is in charge. And in this case, God decides to have them change direction. What they wanted to do was go deeper into what is modern-day Turkey. In other words, as they're coming up the coast there, they want to go east and go into those regions, deeper into Turkey. But the Holy Spirit says, no, I want you to go west. And that is going to change everything. That is going to change everything. So it's a reminder that, sometimes God will say yes to us, depending on what our decisions is, our mission is, what we feel God is calling. But sometimes God will say no. Sometimes God will say no, not only no, but I want you to go the opposite direction. It's not like, yeah, go east. No, go northeast. No. The other way. I want you to go the other way. And that's solidified then by a vision that he has of a man of Macedonia who is in Greece. Now, there's a continental divide there, right, between Asia and Europe. And so what the Spirit is telling them is, no, you're going to go into Europe now. You're going to go into Greece. Now, this is interesting, and a writer named Everett Harrison, who was a Presbyterian minister, said this, and I think it's really, really fascinating. It's a quote, so I thought it was good. Alexander the Great had moved from west to east to conquer brilliantly and fuse the word with everything Greek. Now a converted Jew was moving in the opposite direction, from Asia to Europe, to conquer for Christ. Kind of interesting that they go different ways like that. Also, notice how Luke writes about this, right? We saw this vision, and we decided to go to Macedonia. Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Luke. So they do that. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, and the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city for some days, and on the Sabbath day we went outside the gate by the river where we supposed there was a place of prayer. And we sat down and spoke to the woman who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer of purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. And when she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us. So they go to the port city for the city of Philippi. Just a little bit about Philippi. The Romans conquered Philippi in 468 BC. But it was known for, not only was it a commercial center at that time, but it was also the place where Augustus, the very first Roman emperor, defeated Brutus and Cassius in 42 BC, thereby becoming a Roman colony with all of the privileges of being a Roman citizen. So it becomes a Roman colony and in that time. Now we know that there's no synagogue there because Paul's pattern was to go to a place, go to the local synagogue and do his ministry there for the most part, trying to reach out to those Jews who happen to be in that place. In this case, there is no synagogue, so he goes to the next place that he is assuming where he can find believers, and that would be down by the river. So Jews often would go to a water source if there was no local synagogue. So that means there's less than 10 men in that city to be able to have a synagogue. A minyan would be 10. So there's less than 10 Jews, men who are Jews, to be able to form a synagogue. While he's down there, he discovers Lydia. What we know about Lydia is a couple things. One, she is affluent. How do we know she's affluent? Well, she's living in a city that she isn't really originally from, and she's a dealer in purple cloth. Purple dye was very, very expensive. It was made from sponges. You get the purple dye from sponges in this case at that time. Very, very expensive cloth to be able to make and manufacture. She's a dealer in purple cloth. She's got to be doing really, really well. We also get that sense because she says, "Come and stay in my house." In other words, she's got room in her house, right? So you know how that goes. I mean, if you don't have room in your house, you don't exactly say, "Hey, you four, why don't you come stay with me?" But she's got room for 4 extra people, so that means that she has guest rooms. Guest rooms were very, very unusual at that time. So she must have money. We realize she's a God-fearer. She is someone who wants to know more about the Jewish faith. I think I shared with you before in previous lessons that was quite common. There was something very, the idea of a monotheism, the moral, the straightness of it, the following of the law, the morality of it. It was very attractive to some people who were Jewish and Romans to learn more about the Jewish faith and to follow the Jewish faith. As we talked before that, some, were a little, maybe like Timothy before, right? A little afraid to go through the whole process of circumcision, but there was a fair number of people that would follow. And Judaism at that time was a proselytizing faith. They didn't mind going out, and I mean that in a good way, by the way. They liked sharing their faith. They liked sharing their faith with the Greeks. It was less, even though they had those boundaries, as we know about, they did like to share their faith, and God-fearers were a big part of that. You'll recall that in the temple, the court of the Gentiles is the largest court. So the place where all of the rabbis would be teaching is the court of the Gentiles, and it's the only place that Gentiles on the Temple Mount where they were allowed to go. Matter of fact, they even had signs. They found signs that hey, if you cross this boundary, they would have put stones down, like a little fence, a little boundary marker, and they would have signs on there that said, if you're a Gentile and if you go over these stones, we're going to kill you, right? Big boundaries, right? But as far as the court of the Gentiles was concerned, yes, come up there, listen to the rabbis, sit at the feet of the rabbis and listen and learn and engage in the Jewish faith and engage in the Jewish tradition. We also see in chapter 16, now this is the whole chapter, you're going to see how the church is connecting with every social strata. Okay, so first is going to be the story of Lydia, who is someone who is quite affluent. But watch the different people who come to Christ, and you're going to see every social strata involved in that. And Lydia becomes the first European convert, right? The first European convert that's recorded in the book of Acts is Lydia. Not only is she baptized, but we also see that her whole household is baptized. A household is not just your immediate family, it's also everybody living in your household. So any servants, any slaves that you might have, it would be the whole thing. And you can imagine she probably had a number of servants just because she's a person of means. And she's a person of means and has a big house, obviously, that she has all these guest rooms that she can accommodate people to come and visit. Okay, let's keep going. One day while we were going to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners a great deal of money by fortune telling. While she followed Paul and us, she would cry out, "These men are slaves of the Most High God, who proclaim to you a way of salvation." She kept doing this for many days, but Paul, very much annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I order you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out of her that very hour. But when her owners saw that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. When they had brought them before the magistrates, they said, "These men are disturbing our city. They are Jews and are advocating customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to adopt or observe." The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates had them stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. And after they had given them a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailers to keep them securely. Following these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was an earthquake so violent that the foundations of this prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains were unfastened. When the jailer woke up and saw the prison doors wide open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, since he supposed that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted in a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." The jailer called for lights, and rushing in, he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them outside and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they answered, "Believe on the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." They spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And at the same hour of the night he took them and washed their wounds. And then he and his entire family were baptized without delay. He brought them up into the house and set food before them. And he and his entire household rejoiced that he had become a believer in God. When morning came, the magistrates sent the police, saying, "Let those men go." The jailer reported the message to Paul, saying, "The magistrate sent word to let you go, therefore come out now and go in peace." But Peter replied, "They have beaten us in public, and uncondemned men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison, and now they're going to discharge us in secret? Certainly not. Let them come and take us out themselves." The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens, so they came and apologized to them. And then they took them out and asked them to leave the city. After leaving the city, they went to Lydia's home, and when they had seen and encouraged the brothers and sisters there, they departed. What a scene, right? Wow. Got everything in this. Got a slave girl that's got a spirit and enables her to tell, do fortunes. Fortune telling was very, very common in that culture, both Greek and Roman culture, very, very common. And here we have some men that are actually exploiting this slave girl because she has this gift of being able to tell fortunes. We also see that, casting out a demon in the name of Jesus does something. It casts out the demon in the name of Jesus is what it does. It does exactly what it says. It has power, right? Another reason that we have this idea in the commandments, right? Honor the name of the Lord your God, right? Here in this case, it's going to be used for healing. And we see this interesting juxtaposition between greed and the joy of healing, right? The men that owned a slave, they're not happy that, oh wow, she no longer has this evil spirit. They're mad because they're not going to be able to make money off of her anymore. So they cause a commotion. They get them arrested. They get Paul and Silas arrested. And we get to see a little bit, the magistrates are like governors, right? So every Roman colony had two people that were kind of in charge. The charge, though, was not that they had performed an exorcism on a slave girl, but rather that these men were Jews and were throwing the city in an uproar. In other words, the main charge against them is good old-fashioned anti-Semitism. These guys should be arrested and beaten because they're Jews. Oh, and they're causing an uproar, which is interesting because the uproar is actually being caused by them, right? They're the ones who are getting the crowd all upset. But they are able to get them. Charged. Now, the reason I said it's good old-fashioned anti-Semitism because you'll also notice that Luke and Timothy are not arrested, right? It's the two Jewish guys that are arrested, not Luke and Timothy. And we see this really great scene. And notice their reaction to the injustice, right? And injustice has been had. They've been thrown into prison. They have been beaten. Not only are they thrown into prison, but notice the little note that they are thrown into the deep recesses of the prison, and they're locked up. Right? They're put in the stocks. In other words, they basically took these guys for what would be, for being Jewish, and they put them with the hardened criminals. Right? They put them in the hardest section of the prison to be able to escape. Right? So they're being mistreated amazingly. And how do they respond to that mistreatment? Praying and singing. Right? They don't whine about it. They don't complain about it. They don't say, oh, woe is us. No. They pray, they sing, they worship. And the people that are around them notice this and are paying attention to it as well, right? They're seeing that. And not only that, but when the earthquake comes and all of the gates open up and everything falls off, all the chains fall off, nobody goes anywhere, right? Those prisoners are still in there listening to the prayers and the singing that Paul and Silas are doing. So, here's a quote from Tertullian, one of the early church fathers. The legs feel nothing in the stocks when the heart is in heaven. Isn't that great? The legs feel nothing in the stocks when the heart is in heaven. Now the guard, of course, when he finds out that, oh gosh, all the gates are open, he's thinking, I'm in big, big trouble, because his job is to make sure that the prisoners stay in the prison, and if they wouldn't, it was harsh punishments. You could be charged, if you will, with, let me rephrase that. You could be given the same punishment of the people that you let escape. So that there's got to be murderers in that prison. He's thinking, I'm going to get really punished for this. I could get killed for this. Or also, this is so embarrassing, and I have dishonored, this is an honor society, right? Honor, shame. I am so shamed by this event that the proper thing for me to do is just to off myself. And that's why they yell out and they say, no, don't do that. We're all in here. Now the next day they come and they want to. We hear that the magistrates wanted to let them go. After the crowd has kind of settled down, right? After all the shouting is over, the magistrates have some time to think things through and go, okay, listen, these guys got beaten, thrown into jail for a night. That's enough. And they're like, okay, you just go and let them go. That's the reason that they're going to let them go, because they've now had time, right? Isn't that what happens, right? Something happens, everybody overreacts, and then that's probably why it's a good thing why we have such delays in trials, right? I know sometimes that can be frustrated to victims, that things can take so long for justice to finally happen. But one of the good things, the side benefits of that kind of delayed trial is everybody can stop and think about what's the right thing to do in these situations. Paul decides to play the Roman card. He is a Roman citizen. He was born in Tarsus, also a Roman colony, and he claims that right. Civis Romanus sum, one of the most important phrases that you could utter at that period of time. I am a Roman citizen. And with a Roman citizen comes privileges. And one of the privileges is you don't beat me and throw me in jail without a trial, without all of the stuff that goes with it. Romans have special privileges in the Roman Empire. And that's why you had all of these towns and local cities that wanted to get that status of being a Roman colony or Roman protectorate, right? Because they get privileges. And he is now going to do this. There's a law that was enacted at the beginning of the Roman Republic in the early 2nd century BC that Roman citizens were exempted from degrading forms of punishment and had certain valued rights established for them in relation to the law. Right? So you just can't do it. Of course, the response that the magistrates have is, oh crap, nobody told us that they were Roman citizens. They know that this is not good for them, right? And so they do exactly what they said. They go to the prison. They apologize. We are so sorry. We didn't know. Why didn't you tell us earlier? That's a good question, right? Why didn't you tell us earlier, Paul? We don't have an answer to that. It's just that I think it's a fair question. Why didn't you tell us? But they apologize and they let them go and say, thank you for visiting. Why don't you just hit the road since everybody's upset about this whole situation? And so they go. Again, go back to Lydia's spending some time with her. What else did I want to say with that? Oh, and of course we hear that, again, the whole household of the jailer becomes a part of the church as well. What are we doing? Well, we're doing good. After Paul, chapter 17, after Paul and Silas had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, then they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days argued with them from the Scriptures. This term argued is a little bit on the harsh side, so this is one of those places where the English, it's more than discussion. It's not as much as arguing. Do you know what I mean? So if there's something kind of in between like that, maybe it's arguing like someone would argue in court. That probably fits better, right?
The Gideon Bible says they reasoned with them.
They reasoned with them. Yeah. So there's definitely, yeah. So I think arguing as you would do in court, right? It's nothing personal. It's on the merits kind of thing. So that's what they're doing. Argued with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, this is the Messiah Jesus who I am proclaiming to you. Some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews became jealous, and with the help of some ruffians in the marketplaces, they formed a mob and set the city in an uproar. And while they were searching for Paul and Silas to bring them out to the assembly, they attacked Jason's house. When they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the believers before the city authorities, shouting, these people who have been turning the world upside down have come here also. And Jason has entertained them as his guest. They are all acting contrary to the decrees of the emperor, saying that there is another king named Jesus. The people and the city officials were disturbed when they heard this, and after they had taken bail from Jason and others, they let them go. So we've been getting some glimpses of this, of how Paul operates. But this beginning of chapter 17 is really perfect, because take this as an example, and you're going to see new place, this is what happens. New place, this is what happens. New place, this is what happens. Paul goes to the synagogue. He preaches to the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks. And the response is typical. There's a revival among the Greeks, right? They get excited about the gospel and about Jesus. And there's a riot that occurs because there are Jews that don't accept Jesus as Messiah and want to kick them out of wherever they are. We're going to see this over and over again. Thessalonica is one of the wealthiest and most influential cities in Macedonia. So it has a population of over 200,000. 200,000, that's big, right? That's a big city. That's a nice sized city like now, right? It's one of the wealthiest and most flourishing trade centers of the Roman Empire because it's on the highway, right? It's on one of the main roads that the Romans had created. And so you're just going to take everything from the sea and coming up around the coast, and it's a straight, it'll be a straight shot kind of into Rome. Luke uses 3 different words to describe his ministry. One, he argued. The Greek word is dialexato, which means to discuss or converse. Like I said, it's a little bit different than debated, where he uses that word in 17:17. There's also explaining. The Greek word is dianogon, which literally means opening. It's the same word that's used when Jesus is talking to the same word that Luke uses when Jesus is talking to the disciples on the road to Emmaus after the resurrection. He opened their eyes, right? And then finally, proving, the Greek word parathitemenos, which carries the idea of bringing something forward as a way of proof. Here, Paul brought the appropriate Old Testament scriptures before them, but he's teaching them that the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus proves that he is the Messiah, the one who is to come. We also see here, there's something significant that also occurs here in the same way that it occurred with Lydia as not only the first European convert, but also someone of means. We hear that there are prominent women of the upper class who have also become Christians at this point. Remember what we had said before. He's reaching that kind of that upper middle class, the slave girls, the working class jailer, and now we're talking the upper political crust that the church is. Just in the course of this one and a little bit more chapter, we're seeing that the church is connecting with a variety of different social strata of Greek and Roman society. The main accusation against them is treason, right? They are proclaiming another king. We heard this before, and actually this is very similar to the accusation that they make before Pilate with Jesus, right? He's proclaiming to be a king. And like all good lies, it does bear some resemblance to the truth, but it also puts it in the worst possible light, right? They are proclaiming a king. They are proclaiming that Jesus is king, but they're skewing it in a way to make it the worst possible thing that they could make it. Okay, let's keep going. Well, let me see. I might want to we'll do this. The very night the believers sent Paul and Silas off to Beroea, and when they arrived, they went to the Jewish synagogue. These Jews were more receptive than those in Thessalonica, for they welcomed the message very eagerly and examined the scriptures every day to see whether these things were so. Many of them, therefore, were believed, including not a few Greek women and men of high standing. Here we go again with some of the higher echelons. But when the Jews of Thessalonica learned that the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul in Berea as well, they came there too to stir up and incite the crowds. Then the believers immediately sent Paul away to the coast, but Silas and Timothy remained behind. Those who contacted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving instructions to have Silas and Timothy join him as soon as possible, they left him. So we can see, Paul is clearly the match, right? And so they're following Paul, and he's the one that I don't want to say causing the trouble, but he's the one that they're really going after, so that even they send him away. They leave behind a couple of the other disciples to continue to do the edification and teaching, but removing Paul out of that situation seems to calm things down just a little bit. And when we hear that, again, you're finding these people that are very open to listening to the Word of God. And what are the words that they're open-minded, they're teachable, they're eager listeners, they're open to hearing the truth. They're searching the Scriptures, right? They're doing their homework, right? They're really seeking to understand, what does this mean and how does this fit and what is this? They're truth seekers. They're looking for that sense of absolute truth. Okay, let's keep going. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. There he is. Synagogue, marketplace. So he's ministering to those who are Jewish, those who are God-fearers, who would also be in the synagogue, but as well those in the marketplaces. The marketplaces were those places where not only produce were sold, but you could also have teaching and dialogue and happening at the same time. It was also, by the way, the place where the judges would sit to, if you had a problem with your neighbor or something, you could take it to that. So it was a big kind of open place with a lot of activity kind of going on. Which also helps you understand, how are they able to make these mobs that quick? Well, you go to the place where the people are and you whip them up. So the marketplace would have been a good place for that. There also were some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debating with him, and some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign divinities." This was because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Also, I meant to say this too before. Notice how Paul is always on point. What is Paul proclaiming? The life with all the teachings, the death, the resurrection of Jesus. That's it. That is the fancy word for that. That is the kerygma. That is the core of Christian preaching and has been for 2,000 years. If you ever find yourself in a church and you're like, gee, I wonder why aren't they talking more about the resurrection? That's a problem, right? That's the core, always. Life, death, resurrection. There it is, always. Yep. They took him and brought him to the Areopagus. What's the right pronunciation of that? Areopagus, huh? Areopolis, right? Acropolis. Yeah, this one says Areopagus, but Acropolis. Yeah, it is the Acropolis. It's the one. Yeah, it's the one up high. Yeah. And asked him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us, and we would like to know what it means." Now, all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing. Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus, you know what I mean? And he said, Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who has made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth. He allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would be, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. For we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think of the deity like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, we will hear you again about this. But at that point, Paul left them. But some of them joined him and became believers, including Dionysius and Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with them. I love the details, by the way, where Luke adds the names. And do you know why he adds the names? Because they're real people. He was there. He knows their names. And so when he talks about Jason, you know, people who read this again later will go, oh, I know Jason. Oh, I know, what did I just say with their names? I know Dionysus. I know Damaris. You know, these are well-known people in the Christian community, in the community of faith. So, you probably have heard of Athens before. Athens was one of the great Roman city-states in Greece, in the heyday of Greece. It ain't that now. You know, as we were talking about Thessalonica with 200,000 people, at this time in Athens, there are only about 10,000 people living there. And in a way, it's like that place that used to be really famous, you know, really important, and now it's not. And so what they do is they get to talk about all the things that made them famous. And so it's still a place to talk philosophy, right? To talk about ideas, but it's just not what it used to be. But you still have all of the remnants of what it used to be, all of the architecture that is left behind, all of the statues and the idols and the temples, big and small. You know, this was the center of Greek philosophy, culture, and education 400 years before. So it's 400 years later, right? Things are probably, you know, falling a little bit into disrepair. The Epicureans and Stoics were the dominant philosophers in Greek culture. I want to share a little bit about what they did. The Epicureans were the followers of Epicurus, believed that the chief purpose for living was pleasure and happiness. If God existed, he didn't interfere in human affairs. So you kind of do whatever you want. Don't worry, just be happy, right? And these would be today, modern day, either just people that are materialistic, you know, just get stuff for yourself, or hedonistic, right? Live the crazy life. The Stoics were followers of Zeno, who taught on a porch or a patio called a stoa, hence the Stoics. The Stoics were pantheistic, so they kept all of the Greek gods and goddesses, and felt that the great purpose was directing human history. So humans' responsibility was to align themselves with that purpose through duty and self-discipline. These would be the people that, it's all about self-sufficiency, right? Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, but also just, live that kind of life that's very regimented as well. We see in this sermon on what also is known as Mars Hill, which is easier to sell than Areopagus. Fantastic preaching. This is really great preaching. This is impressive preaching on a number of different levels. He has this attention to detail, this cultural appreciation, and of course, faithfulness. Right? Abraham Lincoln said, before you convince a man of anything, you must first convince him that you are his true friend. You'll notice that even though there are different perspectives on these philosophies and you could say religions, notice how he approaches them. Notice the compliments that Paul gives. The recognition that, wow, look at this. You have all of these statues and idols and everything else, and how nice that is. He affirms their religious nature, even though it's different from him. He affirms it. He appreciates their city. They're proud of their city. They're proud of their accomplishments. They're proud of their history. But he also tailors their message seeking the common ground. I found an altar with an inscription, to an unknown God. Right? Now, let me tell you. I can tell you who that God is. And it's so faithful to the Judeo-Christian tradition because he immediately starts talking about God, the creator of all things. Right? That at the center of that unknown God is the one who made everything and made you. And then he also brings in some Greek philosophers, from Greek philosophy quotes. The first quote is from Epimenides. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right. Who was a Cretan poet from 600 BC, and a quote from Aphrodite, a Stoic poet. Those two quotes that you see. In him we live and move and have our being, which he'll use again, by the way. And I think Corinthians, I think he does. But for we too are his offspring. Yeah, that's the one from Aphrodite. Yeah, really cool. Really cool. And then you see, he brings in the resurrection, right? Okay, now Paul leaves and he leaves Athens, he goes to Corinth. He there finds a Jew named Aquila, a native Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. So this is kind of interesting, because for a couple reasons. One is secular historians, there's a secular historian of the time, Suetonius, hints for the reason of the dispersion. Why did Emperor Claudius kick out all of the Jews? He writes that there were Jewish riots instigated by Chrestus, which may be a reference to the religious upheavals between strict Jews and the followers of Christ. So this might be one of the early references to the same thing that is happening with Paul. We get a sense that, wait a second, Christianity has made it all the way to Rome. And the same reaction is kind of happening. I mean, there are riots in the Jewish community because of this teaching. Corinth was the most influential city in Greece at the time. 650,000 people lived there. 400,000 of those were slaves. So it's a center of commerce, culture, and religion. They had 12 temples. The most famous was Aphrodite. Of course, in the temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. So if you're going to worship the goddess of love, what do you want to have in your temple? Prostitutes, of course, right? Another big temple was the temple to Apollo. And there, you made sure that you actually paid young men to have sex with men and women and whatever, So let's just say Corinth wasn't known for its morality. Or maybe it was for its immorality, right? That's kind of what it was known for. It was quite the cosmopolitan place, but religious diversity of all different times, all different kinds of sorts with that. So of course, that's where Paul wants to go, right? Because he's going to see this. Oh, this is a challenge. I like this, right? So he wants to go there. It's a challenge, but also it's also an opportunity. Paul immediately hits it off with these two Christians that he finds that come from Rome. Keep in mind, he is a tent maker as well. So this is perfect. He can make a little money on the side as he continues to do his mission and ministry. He's not being, he is being supported by some, places in the church, but for the most part, he's got to make his own way. And so he is, what a great situation. He finds two, a nice Christian couple for them to be able to make tents together and make a little money. Of course, tent making was pretty big and pretty important. You have a big army, right? Big Roman army. And what do you need if you got a big Roman army? Tents so probably their contracts were with the Roman government, with the Roman army to make tents for their for the soldiers. We get the same response that we got from other places. So the more hardcore Jewish folks were upset and get upset about what they're doing. I didn't really read that, did I? So Silas and Timothy arrive from Macedonia. They get opposed, reviled. He says, shake the dust off your feet. I'm trying to go a little quicker here. I'm only going to 23. More people are being baptized. They're connecting with more people. He stays there quite some time, 1 year and 6 months. That's a long time for him to stay with a place, but it also shows how he cared for them and why we see in 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians his desire to help them. Two things we can see in 1 and 2 Corinthians. His desire to help them understand the gospel better, but also the plurality and the different religious experiences and how it was easy for them to kind of infuse and come into the church, right? Because it was such a crazy kind of place. But when Gallo was proconsul of Achaia, this is verse 12, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal. They said this man is persuading people to worship God in ways that are contrary to the law. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to the Jews, if it were a serious matter or serious villainy, I would have justified in accepting the complaint of you Jews. But since it is a matter of questions about words and names of your own law, see to it yourselves. I do not wish to be a judge of these matters. And he dismissed them from the tribunal. Then all of them seized Thessalonica, the official of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal. But Gallio paid no attention to any of these things. Okay, this is really important. Very, very important. What happened here? So once again, they bring him before the Roman tribunal, the Roman tribute, right? The guy who's in charge. And they bring an accusation of the same accusation that we've seen all the way through, right? He wants them punished. But what is his reaction? What is his reaction? I'm not going to punish them. Not only am I not going to punish them, this is out of order, right? This is a Jewish question. Now, why is that important? Jews in the Roman Empire also had privileges and were recognized and were able to be separate from the pantheon of gods that the Romans had, right? They had a protected status, if you will. Fine, we won't make the Jews do all the stuff we make everybody else do, basically, as it relates to their civic religion, right? If they're in a guild, they don't have to pray to the emperor. If they don't have to, they don't have to do all the stuff that everybody else had to do. Why is that important? This gives basically a 10-year cooling off period for the church before the church is then separated. The Christians are separated from the Jews officially, legally. So it provides a legal precedent to including Christians in the Jewish faith, and therefore giving them the protections that it is afforded to Jews in the empire. Okay? Which means that for 10 years, the Christians were able to continue to teach, preach, grow with not as much persecution. Now, granted, you're going to see Paul keeps on getting beaten and stuff like that. That stuff happens. But officially, the legal precedent because of this ruling is, as far as I'm concerned, this is the Roman guy, as far as I'm concerned, hands off. That's your problem. You deal with it. And then even to the point where he's mad at the guy who brought the charge and goes ahead and go ahead, you can just beat him up a little bit just to make the point that I don't want to deal with this. But it really, the court refused to hear charges against Christians as it related to Jews bringing accusations against Christians for a decade. And as we've seen so far, look at the church grow and grow and grow. And a lot of that is why. I'm going to stop there. Then Paul, just so you know, Paul then returns to Antioch, and then we're going to see the third missionary journey after that. Okay? Any questions? Nice section, right? A lot of good stuff there. All righty. Well, take care. Once again, thank you so much for joining us for this Bible study, and we invite you to join us next week as well as we go through chapter 18, verse 24, all the way through chapter 21, verse 16. Take care and God bless.